The air in the Blue Ridge Mountains was supposed to be a balm, a clean, sharp antidote to the dust of Afghanistan that still seemed to clog Jake Callahan's lungs. He'd come here seeking a silence that wasn't menacing, a solitude that didn't feel like a cage. Beside him, trotting with the easy confidence of a creature perfectly at home in the wild, was Rex. The German shepherd's sable coat blended with the dappled afternoon light filtering through the dense canopy of oak and hickory. Rex was more than a dog. He was a living, breathing anchor to the present. His quiet companionship the only one Jake could tolerate. They were far from any marked trail, following the ghost of an old logging path that had long since surrendered to moss and memory. Jake walked with the economical grace of a man who had spent years moving through hostile territory. His eyes, a pale, weary blue, scanned his surroundings out of habit, cataloging the dip and swell of the terrain, the rustle of unseen things in the undergrowth. But here, the only enemy was the one he carried inside his own head. It was Rex who found it first. The dog's ears, which had been swiveling to capture the chatter of a nearby squirrel. Suddenly locked forward, a low whine rumbled in his chest, and he stopped dead. His powerful body rigid. "What is it, boy?" Jake murmured, his hand instinctively going to the dog's neck. Feeling the tension in the muscles there, Rex didn't bark. He just stared intently towards a thicket of rhododendron, a dark green mass against the rustic autumn colors. He pulled, a gentle but insistent tug on the leash. Jake sighed. He had learned long ago to trust the dog's instincts. Rex had saved his life twice overseas, not with his teeth, but with his nose and his uncanny ability to sense what was wrong. He let Rex lead, pushing through the scratchy branches. The air grew still, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. And then they saw it. Tucked into a small, shadowed clearing was the skeleton of a cabin. Its roof had long ago collapsed into a V shape, and the logs of its walls were silvered with age and rot. Returning slowly to the forest floor, it was a place of profound loneliness. A forgotten footnote in the history of the mountain. Jake felt a prickle of unease. This was someone's private property, however abandoned. But Rex was now pulling harder, his whine escalating into a soft, anxious bark. He was focused on the dark, gaping hole where a door had once been. All right, I'm coming," Jake said, his voice low. He unclipped the leash and Rex bounded forward, disappearing into the darkness of the ruined structure. "Rex, heel?" The command was ignored. Jake's unease sharpened into genuine concern. He moved to the threshold, his eyes adjusting to the dim interior. The air inside was thick, layered with the smells of mildew and animal nests. Debris littered the floorboards, rotted leaves, fallen timbers, the detritus of seasons of neglect, and in the far corner, almost swallowed by the shadows, was a small, still shape for a heart-stopping moment. Jake thought it was an animal, but then the shape moved. It was a child, a little girl, curled into a tight ball, her dirt-smudged face buried in her knees. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Her hair was a tangled, matted mess, and her thin dress was torn and filthy. She was unnervingly silent, making herself as small as possible, as if willing the world to overlook her. Rex stood a few feet away from her, not barking anymore, but whining softly, his tail giving a single, tentative wag. He was on duty, his protective instincts overriding everything else. Jake's breath caught in his throat. His mind, trained for combat scenarios, raced through a dozen impossible explanations, each more disturbing than the last. He held up his hand slowly, as if approaching a frightened colt. "Hey there," he said, his voice softer than he'd used in years. "It's okay. We're not going to hurt you." The girl didn't look up, but her small body tensed, coiling even tighter. Jake took another slow, deliberate step forward, He could see the sharp points of her shoulder blades through the thin fabric of her dress. She was starving his heart, a thing he'd thought long since hardened into a useless lump of scar tissue. Twisted with a pain so sharp and sudden it almost made him gasp, he crouched down, keeping his distance, trying to make himself seem less imposing. "My name is Jake," he said gently. "And this is Rex. He's a good boy. He's the one who found you." Silence. The only sound was the drip of water from a broken beam and the thumping of his own heart. He needed to get her out of here. He needed to call for help. But he knew that any sudden move might send her bolting into the woods. And in her condition, she wouldn't last the night. "Can you tell me your name?" He tried again. "Are you lost?" For a long moment, she remained a statue of fear. Then, slowly, agonizingly, she lifted her head. Her face was gaunt and smudged with grime. But her eyes were huge and deep brown. And in them, he saw not just terror, but a startling, heartbreaking flicker of resolve. She looked past him at the crumbling doorway, at the forest beyond, as if expecting someone. Her lips, chapped and pale, parted. Her voice, when it came, was a dry, rasping whisper. A sound so fragile it was nearly lost in the oppressive silence of the ruin. "A mother told me to stay." The 5 whispered words hung in the dead air of the cabin, heavier than the decaying timbers above them. "A mother told me to stay." It wasn't an answer, it was a creed. A sacred instruction, this tiny, starved sentinel had been obeying with a devotion that shattered something deep inside Jake. He had seen loyalty on the battlefield, men who would hold a line against impossible odds. But this was different. This was the pure, unwavering faith of a child, and it was the most heartbreaking thing he had ever witnessed. His own ghosts, the ones that screamed at him in the dead of night, receded. A new mission objective clicked into place with cold, undeniable clarity, secure and protect. "Okay," he said, his voice even steadier now. "You did good. You stayed. But your mother would want you to be safe now. It's getting cold." He slowly shrugged off his backpack. "I have some water. Are you thirsty?" The girl, he couldn't keep thinking of her as just the girl, watched his every move. Her eyes darted from his face to Rex, who sat patiently. A perfect model of non-threatening behavior. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Jake pulled out his metal water bottle, unscrewed the cap, and slid it gently across the dusty floorboards. It stopped a few feet from her. For a full minute, she just stared at it. Then, with a slow, trembling hand, she reached for it. She drank greedily, the water spilling down her chin onto the tattered front of her dress. When she was done, she carefully screwed the cap back on and pushed it back toward him. The simple act of courtesy in the midst of such squalor was another blow to his carefully constructed armor. "I have to get you out of here," Jake said softly. "We can find your mother together, but we can't do it from here." He stood up slowly, extending a hand. "My name is Jake. What's yours?" She flinched back from his hand but answered, her voice still a reedy whisper. "Lily." "Lily," he repeated. It was a beautiful name for a child who had been living in the dark. "It's nice to meet you. Lily? Can you walk?" She tried to stand, her legs wobbling like a newborn fawn's. She took one step and crumpled. Without a second thought, Jake moved forward and scooped her into his arms. She weighed next to nothing, a bundle of sharp bones and fragile warmth. She stiffened for a moment, a wild thing unused to touch, before surrendering with a sigh that seemed to carry the exhaustion of weeks. She didn't cry. She just rested her head against his shoulder, her gaze fixed on the cabin as they left it behind. As if she were memorizing her post one last time. The journey back to his rental house was a slow, deliberate trek. Lily was a feather-light burden in his arms, but the weight of his responsibility for her felt immense. Rex trotted ahead, constantly looking back. His role shifted from companion to advanced scout for his new, vulnerable pack member. Jake's house was a small, modern cabin he'd rented for 6 months. A sterile box of glass and cedar dropped into the wilderness. It was neat, impersonal, and, until now, perfectly silent. Placing Lily on the plush sofa in the living room felt like placing a wild bird in a sterile laboratory. She looked tiny and out of place, her dirty bare feet tucked underneath her on the clean gray fabric. His training provided a checklist. First, immediate needs. "I'm going to run a bath for you," he said, already moving toward the bathroom. "There's soap, and I'll find you something clean to wear." He found his softest, most worn-out t-shirt, a gray one that would hang on her like a tent. He left it outside the bathroom door with a towel and gave her privacy. Standing guard in the hallway, listening to the quiet splashing, he was a soldier. He knew how to clear a room, how to set a charge, how to triage a gunshot wound. He had no idea how to care for a child while she was in the bath. He made her food 2 eggs, scrambled soft, and a piece of toast, cut into small squares. When she emerged from the bathroom, scrubbed clean and wrapped in his giant shirt, she looked even more fragile. The dirt had hidden the deep blue smudges of exhaustion under her eyes and the gaunt hollows of her cheeks. She sat at the small kitchen table and ate with a slow, methodical desperation that spoke of long-practiced hunger. She ate every last crumb, then looked up at him, her big brown eyes wide. "Thank you," she whispered. Jake just nodded, his throat thick. He knew what he had to do next. He picked up his phone and dialed the number for the county sheriff. The voice that answered was tired and gravelly. "Sheriff Brody, my name is Jake Callahan," Jake began, keeping his voice level and professional. "I'm renting the Miller cabin out on Ridge Road. I was hiking this afternoon and I found a child. A little girl." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a heavy sigh. "Found a child? What do you mean?" "Found in the old ruined cabin about 2 miles north of here. She's alone. Says her name is Lily. She appears to be suffering from malnutrition and exposure, but is otherwise unharmed." "And where are her parents?" Brody asked, his tone laced with a weary skepticism that set Jake's teeth on edge. "That's the problem," Jake said, glancing at Lily, who was watching him, listening to every word. "She says her mother told her to stay there. I don't know where the mother is." Another sigh. Louder this time. "Right. Told her to stay. Look, Mr. Callahan, it's getting late. I've only got one deputy on tonight, and he's handling a domestic down in the valley. More than likely, Mom got tired of her and dropped her off. We'll get a file started. I can probably send someone out in the morning to take your statement and get social services involved." In the morning, Jake's voice hardened. "Sheriff, this child has been alone in the woods for God knows how long. She needs help now. And you've given her help." "Son," Brody said, his voice taking on a patronizing edge, "you've got her in a warm house. You fed her. She's safer there with you tonight than anywhere else. Just keep her put. We'll handle it tomorrow." The line went dead. Jake stared at his phone, a cold fury rising in his chest. Just keep her put. The same casual indifference he had seen from bureaucrats a world away? He was on his own. He turned to see Lily had fallen asleep right at the table, her head pillowed on her arms. Gently, he lifted her again and carried her to the large armchair by the fireplace. He covered her with a thick wool blanket. Rex patted over, circled twice, and lay down on the floor beside her, his head resting near her dangling hand. A self-appointed guard, Jake stood in the center of his silent house. The peace he'd craved now utterly shattered. It was no longer a sanctuary, it was a temporary outpost. And he was on watch. The weight of the little girl's whisper, and the promise he now felt bound to, settled over him. He was no longer just a man hiding from his past. He was the only thing standing between a forgotten child and a world that didn't seem to care. Sleep offered no escape for Jake. He spent the night on the floor by the armchair where Lily slept. A thin blanket his only comfort. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, had him wide awake, his senses on high alert. It was a familiar state of being, a hypervigilance he'd carried home from the war. But the focus had shifted. He wasn't guarding against IEDs or ambush. He was guarding the fitful sleep of a child who weighed less than his rucksack. When dawn broke, painting the large windows with pale, gray light, he was already up, making coffee, the bitter aroma a small anchor to normality in a world that had tilted on its axis. Lily awoke silently. One moment she was asleep. The next her large brown eyes were open. Watching him? She didn't speak, but her gaze was a question. Jake offered her a small, tight smile. "Morning, Lily, you hungry?" She nodded, and Jake felt a small measure of relief. He could handle hunger. Hunger was a simple, solvable problem. He made pancakes, the only breakfast food he had in the house besides eggs. And she ate 3 of them with the same quiet intensity as the night before. Sheriff Brody's cruiser didn't roll up the gravel driveway until nearly noon. The delay grated on Jake's nerves. He watched as the sheriff, a large man whose uniform seemed to be losing a battle with his midsection, heaved himself out of the car. He moved with a slowness that suggested he believed emergencies should operate on his schedule. Not the other way around. "Mr. Callahan," Brody said, his voice flat as he stepped onto the porch. He peered past Jake into the house. "So this is the kid." Lily, who had been sitting on the floor petting a placid Rex, immediately scrambled behind Jake's legs, her small hands clutching the back of his jeans. "Her name is Lily," Jake said, his tone clipped. Brody sighed, pulling out a notepad that had seen better days. "Right. Lily." He spent 10 minutes asking Jake the same questions as the night before, his pen scratching lazily across the page. He asked about Jake's military service, his eyes lingering on Jake for a moment too long. Jake could feel the man mentally filing him away into a box labeled potential head case. "So, you're telling me you just stumbled upon her in the middle of nowhere?" Brody asked while chewing on the end of his pen. "My dog found her. We were hiking, and she just said her mom told her to stay." Nothing else, no name. No idea where this mom went. "That's all she said," Jake confirmed. Frustration simmering. "She's been through a trauma, Sheriff. You can't expect a full report." Right, Brody muttered, not looking up. He then tried to question Lily, crouching down with a grunt. "Hey there, little lady. Sheriff Brody, can you tell me about your mommy?" Lily just burrowed deeper behind Jake, her silence a solid wall. Brody gave up after a few moments with another exasperated sigh. "Well, this ain't getting us anywhere. The land those ruins are on, it all belongs to Marcus Thorne. Big local benefactor. Owns half the county. I gotta go ask him if he knows anything about squatters. It's my due diligence." He paused, looking Jake up and down. "You might as well ride along. It's on your way out, anyway." Jake knew it wasn't an invitation. It was a soft power play. A way for the sheriff to keep an eye on the unstable veteran. He agreed, telling Lily he'd be right back and leaving her in the stoic, furry care of Rex. The Thorne estate was less than 10 minutes away. But it was another world. A set of imposing wrought iron gates opened silently for the sheriff's cruiser, revealing a long, winding driveway flanked by perfectly manicured lawns that rolled towards a house that looked more like a corporate retreat than a home. It was a monument to wealth and control, stark and stunning against the wild, untamed backdrop of the mountains. Marcus Thorne himself met them at the door. He was handsome in a severe, chiseled way, with silvering hair and the easy, confident posture of a man who had never been told no. He was dressed in expensive casual wear that probably cost more than Jake's monthly rent. "Sheriff Brody," he said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone. He offered a firm handshake before his gaze slid to Jake, a flicker of cool assessment in his eyes. "Mr. Thorne, sorry to bother you." Brody began. "This is Jake Callahan. He found a little girl on your property yesterday, up in those old logging ruins." Thorne's face arranged itself into a mask of perfect concern. "My God, a child, is she all right?" "She's fine," Jake cut in, his voice hard. "She's been abandoned." "How dreadful," Thorne said. Turning his full attention to Jake, his eyes were a pale, piercing gray, and they seemed to look right through him. "To think of a child, all alone out there, it's monstrous. Of course, Sheriff. My foundation would be more than happy to contribute to her care, whatever she needs. We appreciate that." "Mr. Thorne," Brody said, clearly impressed, "we were just wondering if you or your staff had seen anyone around that area. A woman, a child, maybe camping or squatting." Thorne laughed, a short, humorless sound. "My head of security, Gavin, runs a tight ship. We patrol the perimeter. If there was a family of raccoons nesting too close to the house, he'd know about it. Squatters highly unlikely. No one has come forward." He then looked back at Jake, his expression softening into one of feigned sympathy. "Mr. Callahan, I understand you're a veteran. We owe you a great debt for your service. But I also know the kind of stress you men are under. The mind can play tricks after what you've seen. Are you absolutely certain about what the girl told you?" The insinuation was as sharp and subtle as a stiletto. He wasn't calling Jake a liar, he was painting him as damaged, unreliable. He was planting a seed of doubt in Brody's already skeptical mind, as they drove away from the sterile perfection of the estate. Brody seemed more relaxed, as if the meeting with Thorne had settled the matter. "See nothing to it," the sheriff said, almost to himself. "Rich guy doesn't know anything. It's just some sad sack mother who couldn't handle it anymore. We'll put out a statewide bulletin. Social services will find a foster home." "Case closed?" Jake didn't answer. He stared out the window at the passing trees. But he wasn't seeing them. He was seeing Marcus Thorne's eyes. He had seen eyes like that before, in men who hid their true intentions behind a veneer of power and charm, his instincts, the ones that had kept him alive when everything else failed, were screaming. Thorne was lying. The smooth, easy denial, the quick deflection, the subtle jab at his mental state, it was all textbook counterinterrogation. The wall he had to break through wasn't just a wall of silence anymore. It now had a face, a name, and a fortress. And Jake knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was no simple case of abandonment. Returning to the cabin felt like crossing a defensive perimeter. Jake found Lily exactly where he'd left her, sitting on the floor with her arms wrapped around Rex's neck. The dog lifted his head and gave a soft woof of greeting, but the girl remained tense until the moment Jake closed and locked the door behind him. Only then did she relax her grip on the dog. The crisis of his absence having passed. "He's a good guard dog," Jake said, forcing a calm he didn't feel. He wouldn't let anyone near. Lily just nodded, her eyes fixed on him. She was a silent barometer of the emotional atmosphere, and she could clearly sense that his meeting with the sheriff and the man from the big house had brought no comfort. The indifferent law had offered no hope, only paperwork and dismissal. Jake felt the familiar, bitter taste of isolation. It was him, a broken soldier, and a loyal dog against a wall of money. Power and apathy. The rest of the day passed in a quiet, fragile truce with the world. Jake didn't push Lily to talk. He knew from his own experience that trauma seals your lips until it feels safe to speak. Instead, he tried to create safety. He let her watch him as he methodically field-stripped and cleaned his handgun, a habit from his old life that now felt like a necessary precaution. He moved with an efficient, practiced calm that seemed to soothe her. He didn't talk much, just existed in the space with her, letting the silence be a shared comfort rather than a void. Rex lay between them, a furry, breathing bridge. The breakthrough came late in the afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the mountain ridge, casting long shadows across the living room floor. Lily had been watching him with an unnerving intensity, her small brow furrowed in concentration, as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. Finally, she seemed to reach a decision. She stood up and walked over to the armchair where she'd slept. Tucked deep into the cushions was the tattered dress she'd been wearing when he found her. He'd been meaning to throw it out, but hadn't had the heart. She reached into a small, hidden pocket sewn into the seam, her small fingers fumbling for a moment before closing around something. She came back to him, her hand held out in a fist. She unclenched her fingers, revealing her treasure on her small, grimy palm. It was a locket. It was made of silver, but it was old and tarnished, almost black in the creases. It was a simple oval shape, worn smooth in places. The kind of object that is held and worried over for years. A thin, delicate chain was looped around her fingers. It was the only possession she had in the world, and she was offering it to him. "This is my mom's," she whispered, her voice barely audible. It was the first time she had volunteered information. Jake felt a profound sense of reverence. He knew this was a test, a significant offering of trust. "It's beautiful, Lily," he said, his voice gentle. She held it out further. "You can look, with extreme care." Jake took the locket. It was cool to the touch. The clasp was stiff, but it opened with a faint click. Inside were two tiny, oval-shaped hollows. One was empty. The other held a photograph, faded and protected by a thin piece of yellowed plastic. It showed a woman with a wide, bright smile and kind eyes, her dark hair tied back from her face. She was holding a much younger Lily, a chubby-cheeked toddler laughing with delight. It was a snapshot of a life that felt a million miles away from the ruined cabin, and the fear in Lily's eyes. This was Elena. This was the mother. "She's very beautiful," Jake said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. He handed it back, but Lily shook her head, pointing to the locket still in his hand as he went to close it. His thumb brushed against the back. He felt it then, a slight unevenness beneath the layers of tarnish. His instincts, honed by years of searching for things that were out of place, kicked in. He held it up to the light, turning it over. There was something there, an engraving, almost completely obscured. "Hold on," he said, his focus sharpening. "There's something on the back." He went into the kitchen, Lily trailing silently behind him. He found a soft cloth and a small container of baking soda, making a thin paste with a few drops of water. He began to rub the back of the locket with a slow, circular motion. He was careful, treating the object with the respect of a museum curator restoring a priceless artifact. To Lily, it was priceless, slowly, like a developing photograph. The dark tarnish gave way to the gleam of polished silver beneath. An image began to emerge from the grime. It wasn't a name, or a date, or a sentimental phrase. It was a flower. A delicate, intricate engraving of a single bloom, its petals uniquely shaped, its stems slender and graceful. It was an orchid. Jake knew nothing about flowers, but he knew this one was unusual. The detail was too specific to be a generic design. It was a portrait of a particular flower, chosen for a reason, engraved on the back of a locket as a secret message. Why? Why this flower? It was a question with no answer, but for the first time since he'd found Lily, they had more than just a ghost of a memory. They had a clue, a tangible, physical piece of the puzzle. He held the locket out for Lily to see, the setting sun glinting off the newly polished orchid. She traced the shape with her tiny finger, her expression unreadable. For her. It was just a picture of a flower her mother loved, But for Jake, it was a key. A key he didn't know how to use. To a lock he hadn't yet found. But it was a start. It was a secret shared between the two of them. A silent promise that he wouldn't stop until he understood what it meant. The engraved orchid on the back of the locket changed the dynamic in the small cabin. It was no longer just a sanctuary, it was a command center. The clue transformed Jake's mission from a passive, protective vigil into an active investigation. He now had a tangible thread to pull, and he intended to unravel it. He knew with grim certainty that Sheriff Brody's promised statewide bulletin would be buried under a mountain of paperwork. If he wanted to find out what happened to Elena, Lily's mother, he was on his own. He needed information, and the only place to get it was in the town of Havenwood. Leaving Lily was out of the question. They were a unit now. Besides, the girl needed proper clothes, shoes that fit, and more food than his Spartan pantry could offer. He drove his truck into town mid-morning, parking on the main street that looked like it hadn't changed much in 50 years. Havenwood was a town of brick storefronts, a single flashing traffic light, and the palpable sense that everyone knew everyone else's business. As they walked, Lily stuck so close to Jake that she practically triped him, her wide eyes taking in the unfamiliar sights and sounds. She clutched his hand tightly, a silent, trembling anchor. Their first stop was the general store, where Jake bought her jeans, a couple of brightly colored shirts, and sturdy sneakers. The simple act of buying clothes for a child felt foreign and strangely intimate. He watched as Lily touched the soft fabric of a pink hoodie, her expression one of wonder, and he felt another crack appear in the fortress around his heart. Next, he guided her into the town's only diner, a place with worn vinyl booths and the comforting smell of coffee and frying bacon. He needed to get her a proper meal, and he knew that a diner was the unofficial heart of any small town, a place where news and gossip flowed as freely as the coffee. He chose a booth in the corner, giving them a view of the room while offering a degree of privacy, as Lily worked her way through a grilled cheese sandwich with the same solemn focus she applied to all food. Jake listened. The low hum of conversation was a tapestry of local life, crop prices, high school football, someone's cousin's surgery. Then, from the booth behind him, he caught a name that made his ears perk up. Thorne. Two older women, their voices a conspiratorial whisper, were dissecting the local hierarchy. And Marcus Thorne, of course, donating the new scoreboard, likes to have his name on everything. One said, "Always has." The other replied, "Still gives me the creeps. That man, like he's, ever since that pretty botanist who used to work for him just disappeared." Jake froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Oh, Elena." The first woman sighed. Such a sweet girl, so bright. It was the strangest thing. One day she's recataloging his entire conservatory. The next, her cottage is empty. People said she just ran off, but I don't know, she loved these mountains. She did. The second woman agreed, her voice dropping lower. Always hiking, looking for those rare flowers of hers, the wild orchids. Said they were her passion. To just leave all that behind, it never sat right with me. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. Elena, botanist, wild orchids. The threads were connecting. He paid the bill, his mind racing, and led Lily back out into the autumn sunlight. He had a name for Lily's mother, and he had his next destination. The Havenwood Public Library was a small, quiet building of stone and dark wood. Smelling of old paper and lemon polish, it felt like a church of knowledge, a safe haven from the world outside. Behind a large wooden desk sat a woman with a cloud of white hair, sharp, intelligent eyes behind a pair of reading glasses, and a welcoming smile. A small brass nameplate read, "Eleanor Vance, head librarian." Jake approached the counter, with Lily hiding behind his leg as usual. "Ma'am," he began, "I was hoping you could help me. I'm trying to identify a flower. I can certainly try, Eleanor said, her voice warm. I'm the closest thing this town has to a horticulturalist. Next to my garden club, Jake carefully took the locket from his pocket and placed it on the counter, the engraved side up. It's this one here. Eleanor Vance leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. She studied the engraving for a long moment, her brow furrowed. Then her eyes widened slightly in recognition. My goodness, she said, looking up at Jake. Where did you find this? It's a family heirloom. Jake lied smoothly. Well, it's quite special, she said, her gaze drifting down to the small girl peeking out from behind him. This is a Cypripedium McCall, but a specific local variant. Some people call it the Pink Lady's Slipper, but the old mountain folk, they called it the Ghost Orchid of the Blue Ridge. It's exceptionally rare and protected. It's illegal to pick them. She looked at the locket again, a thoughtful, sad expression on her face. You know, there was only one person I ever knew who was a true expert on this particular flower. A lovely young woman who used to spend hours right here in this library, poring over botanical texts. Jake held his breath. What was her name? The librarian's kind eyes met his, and he knew she was making the connection. Her name was Elena, she said softly. She was a brilliant botanist, a wonderful mother. Her gaze fell once more on Lily, and this time there was no mistaking the wave of profound sympathy and dawning horror. That washed over her face. She absolutely adored her little girl. The silence in the library was suddenly immense. Jake finally had a name, a profession, and a link between the mother, the orchid, and her work. More than that. He had found someone who remembered Elena not as a piece of gossip, but as a person. He had found an ally. The trail that had begun with a terrified whisper in a dark ruin was no longer cold. It was leading directly into the shadow of Marcus Thorne. The name Elena settled between Jake and Eleanor Vance, the kindly librarian, heavy with unspoken questions. Eleanor's eyes, full of a sad wisdom, darted to Lily, who was now peeking around Jake's leg with cautious curiosity. The librarian's professional demeanor melted away, replaced by a raw, human concern. She scribbled a phone number on a slip of paper and pushed it across the counter. This is my personal number, she said, her voice low and urgent. Not the library's. Elena was a friend. She was a good person. If you or that little girl need anything at all, you call me. Day or night. Jake took the paper. The small act of trust a stark contrast to Sheriff Brody's bureaucratic indifference and Thorne's slick condescension. Thank you, ma'am, he said, the words feeling inadequate. He had an ally. He wasn't entirely alone anymore. As they left the library, Jake's mind was a whirlwind of tactical considerations. His gut feeling had solidified into a concrete hypothesis. Elena, a botanist specializing in rare orchids, discovered something she shouldn't have while working for Marcus Thorne. And Thorne made her disappear. The ran-off story was a cover, flimsy but effective in a town held in sway by Thorne's money and influence. A direct assault was suicide. Thorne was a fortress of wealth and power. Jake couldn't go to the sheriff, who was already half convinced he was an unstable veteran chasing shadows. He had to go around him. He had to do what he was trained to do, reconnoiter the target, gather intelligence, find a weakness in the defenses. Later that afternoon, he put his plan into motion. He left Lily with a new coloring book and a promise to be back before dark. Leaving Rex on guard duty inside the house, he drove his truck to a public access point for a state-maintained hiking trail. A few miles from the Thorne estate, dressed in dark, practical clothing with a small pack containing water, binoculars, and a camera with a telephoto lens. He looked like any other serious hiker, but his movements were different. He moved with a quiet purpose, his steps sure and silent on the forest floor. He followed the public trail for a mile before veering off. Using a compass and his innate sense of direction to move parallel to the trail, circling toward the Thorn property from the undeveloped woods behind it, it took him nearly an hour to find a suitable observation post, a rocky outcrop shielded by dense foliage. Offering a clear, elevated view of the back of the Thorn mansion and its sprawling grounds, he settled in, took out his binoculars, and began to watch. The phrase gilded cage came to mind. The estate was a masterpiece of cold, clinical perfection. The lawns were impossibly green. The flower beds arranged with geometric precision, security cameras, small black domes of surveillance, were visible at every corner of the house. It wasn't a home, it was a compound. It was designed to keep people out. But also, Jake suspected, to keep secrets in through his lenses. He watched the life of the estate unfold. Gardeners moved with quiet efficiency. Staff in crisp uniforms hurried in and out of side doors. Then, he saw Thorn himself, walking by a large glass wall, talking on the phone. His posture was rigid, his expression a mask of irritation. This was the real man, stripped of the charming facade he wore for the public. A few minutes later, another figure emerged from a side building. He was a big man, powerfully built, with a shaved head and a grim, unsmiling face. He wore the black uniform of a private security contractor. Jake didn't need to be told this was Gavin, the head of security Thorn had mentioned. Gavin moved with a predator's coiled energy, his eyes constantly scanning the perimeter. Jake wasn't the only one who noticed him. Back at the house, Rex, who Jake had decided to bring along at the last minute for his senses, had been lying quietly at his feet, but as Gavin came into view, the dog went rigid. A low, guttural growl, so deep it was more a vibration than a sound, rumbled in his chest. The hair on his hackles rose. Jake placed a calming hand on Rex's neck. Easy, boy. He trusted his dog more than he trusted most people. Rex wasn't just reacting to a stranger. This was different. This was the same instinct that had alerted Jake to a hidden insurgent in an Afghan village. A sixth sense for pure malice. Rex had just confirmed Gavin was a direct and immediate threat. Jake refocused his binoculars on Gavin, who was now walking toward the massive, state-of-the-art conservatory that dominated one side of the property. He watched as Gavin unlocked a section of the building that seemed separate from the main public-facing greenhouse. He disappeared inside for a moment before re-emerging, locking the heavy door securely behind him. There was nothing overtly suspicious about the action, yet it registered as an anomaly. A private, heavily secured section of a greenhouse. A place for projects no one was meant to see, as dusk began to bleed into the sky, tinting the clouds purple and orange. Jake knew it was time to pull back. He had what he came for. He had no tangible proof. Nothing he could take to the law. But he had a map of the battlefield. He had identified the key players Thorn, the cold mastermind, and Gavin, the brutal enforcer. He had a location of interest, a black box he needed to get inside, and he had the unwavering, primal certainty of his dog's instincts backing up his own. He wasn't a lost veteran drifting through the woods anymore. He was a ranger on a mission. The hunt had begun. The information Jake gathered from his reconnaissance mission settled like a block of ice in his gut. He now had faces, routines, and a specific point of interest. But knowledge without the ability to act was a special kind of hell. Back in the cabin, the secure walls began to feel thin, the large windows like vulnerabilities. He drew the curtains, a move that didn't go unnoticed by Lily. She watched him, her big eyes full of questions she didn't know how to ask. He spent the next day trying to build a fortress of normalcy around her. He pushed aside the tactical maps forming in his head and focused on the small girl in his care. He discovered she had a quiet, whimsical imagination. She spent hours with her new coloring book, not just filling in the lines, but adding tiny, intricate details, extra flowers in a field, birds in a blank sky. He sat with her, the soldier and the child, a silent pact of mutual protection existing between them in the bubble of their temporary home. For a few fleeting hours, he allowed himself to believe this peace could last. The illusion was shattered the following morning. The air was crisp and clear, and Jake decided to take Rex for a brief run in the woods surrounding the cabin, leaving Lily watching a cartoon on his laptop. He stepped out onto the porch, breathing in the scent of pine, and immediately knew something was wrong. It was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a disturbance to the baseline of his environment that set his teeth on edge. His eyes scanned the area and landed on his truck. It was tilted at an odd angle. He walked toward it, his steps measured, every sense on high alert. He could see it now. The front right tire was completely flat, slumped against the gravel. A quick check confirmed his suspicion. All 4 tires had been slashed. The cuts were clean, deep, and professional. Not the work of random vandals. This was a message. This was Gavin. Jake felt a surge of cold. Controlled anger? They had stranded him. They were reminding him how isolated he was. Miles from town with no vehicle and a child to protect? He was a fish in a barrel, but that wasn't the whole message. As his eyes swept over the vehicle, he saw it, placed dead center on the hood of his truck. Like a formal calling card, was a single flower. It was an orchid, the ghost orchid of the Blue Ridge, its delicate pink and white bloom looking shockingly alive against the dusty metal. It was perfect, freshly picked, its petals still holding the morning dew. The implications hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just a threat. This was a display of power, it said. We know what you learned at the library. We know what you're looking for. Picking a protected, impossibly rare flower and leaving it on his doorstep was an act of supreme arrogance. It told him they had access to the very thing Elena had died to protect. It screamed, "We can get to you whenever we want. We can touch whatever you hold dear." His hand clenched into a fist. This changed everything. This wasn't a warning to back off. This was a declaration of war. Thorne and his thug hadn't just threatened him. They had defiled his sanctuary. Leaving their filth on his doorstep, they had, by extension, threatened Lily. He heard the cabin door creak open behind him. "Jake!" Lily's small voice called out. "Is everything okay?" He spun around, instinctively shielding the truck and the flower from her view with his body. He forced his face into a mask of calm. "Everything's fine. Lily, just a flat tire. A few of them. Actually, it looks like we ran over some sharp rocks on the road yesterday." It was a weak lie, but it was the best he could do. He couldn't let her see the fear and fury warring inside him. He couldn't let her know that the monster from her past was no longer a distant shadow, but a real and present danger that had just paid them a visit. "Oh," she said, her small face clouded with disappointment. "So we can't go to the store today?" "Not today," he said, walking back towards her and gently guiding her inside. "But don't worry, I'll get it fixed." He closed the door, his eyes locking on the orchid still sitting on his truck's hood. He was trapped, his primary means of escape neutralized. Thorne had him pinned down, but the man had made a critical miscalculation. He had mistaken Jake Callahan for a broken man looking for peace. He had forgotten what a cornered ranger, with someone to protect, was capable of. The fear was there, a cold knot in his stomach. But the fury was hotter. It burned away the last vestiges of the man who had come to these mountains to hide. The warning had failed. It hadn't intimidated him. It had given him a cause. He carefully picked up the orchid, its delicate beauty a grotesque mockery of Elena's fate. He would not run. He would not hide. He would make them pay. "Stranded!" The word echoed in the sudden, oppressive silence of the cabin. Jake was a trained soldier, a man who thrived on mobility, and Thorne's men had taken that from him with a few swift cuts of a knife. He was pinned down, his location known. with a child to protect? The anger still burned hot in his veins. But beneath it, the cold logic of survival took over. Rule 1, secure your asset. He had to get Lily out. His eyes fell on the small slip of paper on the kitchen counter. The one with Eleanor Vance's name and number. It was his only friendly contact in a county owned by his enemy. Asking for help was not in his nature. It felt like admitting defeat, like surrendering a measure of control. But looking at Lily, who was carefully coloring a picture of a deer, oblivious to the danger circling them, he knew his pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. He walked outside to a spot with better reception, his back to the house so Lily wouldn't see his face. He dialed the number. Eleanor picked up on the second ring. Eleanor Vance speaking. Mrs. Vance, this is Jake Callahan. He kept his voice low and steady, devoid of panic. We met at the library yesterday. Mr. Callahan. Yes, of course. Is everything all right? Is the little girl okay? There was immediate warmth and concern in her voice. Lily is fine. But we're not. My truck has been disabled. I have reason to believe we are in immediate danger. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. You told me to call if we needed anything. I need to get Lily somewhere safe. Now. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, followed by a moment of silence that stretched for an eternity. Jake expected hesitation, questions, perhaps a suggestion to call the sheriff. Instead, her voice returned, stripped of its gentle warmth and replaced by a steely resolve. It's him, isn't it? It's Thorn. It wasn't a question. Yes, Jake said. Don't you move, she commanded. Don't go near the road. I have an old station wagon. It can handle the ruts in your driveway. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Be ready. The line clicked dead. Jake went back inside, his mind already shifting to the next phase. Good news, Lily, he said, forcing a brightness into his tone. We're going to have a little sleepover. We're going to stay with my friend Eleanor, the nice lady from the library. Lily looked up, her eyes wide. The one with the books? The very same. Jake confirmed. He packed a single duffel bag with their few belongings, Lily's new clothes, her coloring book, his spare ammunition, and the locket. Every item felt heavy with significance, true to her word. Exactly 20 minutes later, a large, boxy, sea green station wagon came rumbling up the drive. Eleanor Vance was behind the wheel, her knuckles white as she gripped it. Her eyes immediately went to the slumped tires of Jake's truck, and any doubt she might have harbored vanished. The fear on her face was real, and it validated Jake's own sense of urgency. The drive to her house was tense and silent. Eleanor's home was the complete opposite of Thorne's estate, a small, cozy bungalow overflowing with books, plants, and the comforting clutter of a life well lived. She settled Lily in the living room with a glass of milk, a plate of cookies, and a fat orange cat that immediately began purring in her lap once Lily was absorbed. Eleanor turned to Jake, her expression grim. Now, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, you tell me everything. And so he did. He told her about finding Lily in the ruins, Sheriff Brody's indifference, the surveillance of Thorne's estate, Rex's reaction to Gavin, and the final chilling warning of the orchid left on his truck. He laid it all out, the raw, unbelievable facts of the last few days. Eleanor listened without interruption, her face growing paler with each detail when he was finished. She sat in silence for a long time, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I knew it, she finally breathed, her eyes filled with a mixture of grief and fury. I knew he was evil. She stood up, her movements suddenly decisive. Elena was terrified in the weeks before she disappeared. She knew Thorne was dangerous. She suspected he was watching her. She told me she was gathering proof about something terrible, something he'd done. Eleanor walked to an old cedar chest in the corner of the room. She knelt and unlocked it, retrieving a small, plain wooden box, no bigger than a book. It was bound with a simple leather strap. "She gave this to me 2 days before she vanished," Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly as she placed the box on the coffee table between them. "She made me promise. She said, 'Eleanor, if anything happens to me, if you don't hear from me for more than a month, give this to someone you trust, not the police. Someone who can fight, someone who won't be scared of him.'" Eleanor looked up at Jake, her gaze intense and searching. "She was leaving a weapon for an ally she hadn't met yet, I think. Mr. Callahan. She meant for it to be you." Jake stared at the locked box. It was a tangible piece of Elena. A final message from a mother who refused to be silenced. It was her last desperate gamble. A hope she had placed in the hands of a friend. Now passed to him. Whatever secrets it held. He knew it was the key. It was the weapon he would use to burn Marcus Thorne's world to the ground. The small wooden box sat on the coffee table, a silent testament to a mother's foresight. It was unassuming, yet it dominated the room, pulsing with the potential energy of the secrets held within. Jake ran his hand over the worn leather strap that held it shut. This was Elena's last will and testament, her final act of defiance. He looked at Eleanor, whose eyes were shining with unshed tears, and then at Lily, who was now drowsing on the rug, her small hand resting on the purring orange cat. He had to know what was inside. "There's no key," Eleanor said, her voice heavy. "She didn't leave one." "She wouldn't have," Jake replied. Understanding the logic, a key could be lost or stolen. The box was meant to be opened by someone with the will to force it. He pulled a multi-tool from his pocket, the same one he'd used to fix countless pieces of gear in the field. He selected a small, flat-edged tool and worked it carefully into the lock mechanism. After a moment of resistance, there was a sharp click, and the leather strap fell loose. He lifted the lid. The air inside smelled faintly of dried flowers and old paper. There were only 2 items nestled on a bed of faded velvet. The first was a journal, a simple, leather-bound book with a broken elastic closure. The second was a single, small, nondescript key, the kind used for a locker or a padlock. Jake picked up the journal. It felt heavier than it should. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was neat and elegant, the script of a scientist, but the words were full of passion, with Eleanor sitting opposite him, a silent partner in this solemn ritual. Jake began to read. He didn't read aloud, but the story rose from the pages, vivid and heartbreaking. Elena's early entries were filled with joy and wonder. She wrote about her dream job at the Thorne Conservatory, the thrill of working with some of the rarest plants in the world. She described the deep, abiding love she had for the mountains, a love she was passing down to her daughter. Showed Lily the first lady slipper of the season. One entry read, "Her eyes were as wide as the moon. She has the soul of these mountains in her. My wild little flower." But as the months went on, the tone began to shift. The scientist's keen eye for detail started noticing things that were out of place. Another late-night shipment arrived at the conservatory. Gavin was there to meet it. He made sure all the junior staff were gone. The manifest said fertilizer. But the crates were the wrong size and shape. Her curiosity, once a professional asset, became a dangerous obsession. A daughter of an accountant, she had a natural affinity for numbers, under the pretense of managing the conservatory's budget. She began to cross-reference purchase orders with shipping manifests. The discrepancies were glaring. She discovered a ghost inventory priceless. Endangered plants, particularly orchids and rare cycads, that were logged as having died in transit or failed to acclimatize. Yet their acquisition costs were astronomical. "He's a smuggler," she wrote, her handwriting growing more frantic. "Thorne is using the conservatory as a front. He's poaching protected species from public lands, laundering them through his legitimate business, and selling them on the black market for millions. He's stealing the very soul of the wilderness he pretends to cherish. That discovery was horrifying enough. But then she found something far worse. She wrote about a predecessor, a respected researcher named Dr. Alistair Finch, who had, according to official records, died in a tragic hiking fall the year before. Elena, researching Finch's old project notes, found a draft of an email on a shared server that he had never sent. It was addressed to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, detailing his suspicions about Thorne's smuggling operation. The final pages of the journal were almost illegible. The neat script devolved into a desperate scrawl. I found Finch's GPS tracker in a box of his old equipment. The data is still on it. The coordinates for his fall are miles away from where his body was found. And there's another set of coordinates, logged on the same day, for a remote, inaccessible part of Thorne's property. Thorne and Gavin took him there. They killed him. They murdered him and made it look like an accident. He knows I know. I see it in his eyes. Gavin follows me now. I'm not safe. My only concern is Lily. I have to protect my Lily. Jake finally closed the journal. The silence in the room profound. The story was so much worse than he had imagined. Marcus Thorne wasn't just a charismatic cheat or a white-collar criminal. He was a murderer. He had killed once to protect his secret. And he would not hesitate to do it again. Elena hadn't just disappeared, she had been silenced. He looked at the journal in his hands. It was the testimony of a woman who had known she was going to die. It was a meticulously documented indictment. A voice from the grave screaming for justice. And that voice was now speaking directly to him. The weight of Elena's story. Her fear. And her fierce, protective love for her daughter. Settled onto his shoulders, Nadine. It was a burden he willingly accepted. The weight of Elena's last words pressed down on the quiet. Book-lined living room. The story locked away in the journal was now free. And its horror filled the space between them. Eleanor wept silently. Her tears not just for the friend she had lost, but for the terror Elena had endured in her final days. Jake felt no such release. For him. The grief was compressed into a cold, hard diamond of purpose. He now had the motive and the method. He had the testimony. But testimony was not enough to fight a man like Thorne. He needed proof. His gaze fell upon the two objects on the table, the journal and the small, solitary key. Elena was a scientist. She was methodical. Even in her fear, she would have had a plan. He picked up the journal again, flipping past the chilling narrative of the murder to the final. Frantic entries. He wasn't reading for story anymore. He was scanning for operational details. His eyes snagged on a passage he'd skimmed over in his initial shock. My only worry is Lily. He must not find her. He knows I have a daughter, but he has never seen her. Doesn't know her name. It is my only advantage. I have prepared our castle. The old ruins in the woods. The place she loves to pretend she is a queen. It's the last place he would think to look for a child. It's remote. Forgotten. If the worst is about to happen, I will take her there myself. I will give her the most important instruction of her life. I will tell her to stay. Jake's breath caught in his throat. He read the next lines, his heart aching for the impossible choice this mother had to make. She is my good little soldier. She will obey me. I know it. She won't leave her post. It will break my heart to leave her there. But it is the only way. To stay doesn't mean to be abandoned. It means to stay hidden, to stay safe, to stay alive until I can come back for you, or until I send a hero to bring you home. A hero. The word struck Jake with the force of a physical blow. Elena's desperate hope, a message cast into the future, had found its target. He was the hero she had been waiting for. The full meaning of Lily's whispered words. The creed she had so faithfully obeyed in that dark, lonely place. was now crystal clear. It was not a sign of abandonment. It was the ultimate act of a mother's fierce, protective love. "Eleanor," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Listen to this." He read the passage aloud when he finished. The room was thick with a shared, profound understanding of Elena's sacrifice. He continued reading, his eyes scanning for the next piece of the plan, and then he found it. On the very last page, written in a small, cramped script. "This journal is my story. It is the why, but it is not the proof. The proof must be separate, secure. He could find this. I can't risk it all being in one place. The key. The key is for a locker, number 2118, at the Greyhound bus station in Asheville. I put everything there. The USB drive with the original files from Finch's computer, the GPS data from his tracker, copies of Thorne's real shipping manifests, everything the authorities will need if you are reading this. My story is over, but the fight is not. Take this key, finish it." There it was. The endgame. The location of the weapon that could bring Thorne down. Asheville was an hour's drive away. He had to go. "He's a monster," Eleanor whispered, her face pale. "He needs to be stopped, and we're going to stop him." Jake said. The "we" felt natural. This was their fight now. "I need to go to Asheville. I need to get what's in that locker." "But what about Lily?" Eleanor asked, her eyes darting to the sleeping child. "She stays here?" "With you," Jake said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It's the safest place for her. Thorne doesn't know about you. He doesn't know you were friends with Elena. He doesn't know I'm here. For now, this house is safe." Eleanor straightened her shoulders, a spark of defiance in her elderly eyes. The frightened, grieving friend was gone, replaced by a resolute co-conspirator. "Of course, she stays with me. I won't let anyone near her. You have my word." The plan was set. The path forward was clear and fraught with danger. Jake looked over at Lily, so peaceful in her sleep, unaware of the ghost that swirled around her. He was now the guardian of her past and the only hope for her future. Elena had entrusted him with her story, her evidence, and her daughter. It was a sacred trust, one he would fulfill or die trying. He pocketed the small locker key. It felt cold and heavy, a tangible piece of the justice he was about to unleash. The key to locker 218 felt like a live grenade in Jake's pocket. Leaving Lily in Eleanor's care was one of the hardest things he'd ever had to do. The little girl's quiet trust in him was a fragile, precious thing, and he felt like he was betraying it by driving away towards a danger she couldn't comprehend. But Eleanor's resolve was a fortress. "Go," she had said, her hand on his arm. "Bring that monster down. We'll be fine." He drove Eleanor's old green station wagon, a vehicle so unassuming it was practically invisible. Still, every mile of the winding mountain road that led to Asheville. He checked his rearview mirror, his senses on a razor's edge. Every pair of headlights felt like a threat. Every car that lingered behind him a potential tail. He was a ghost, moving from one safe house to the next. On a mission fueled by a dead woman's courage, the Asheville bus station was a chaotic hub of transient life. The air was thick with the smell of diesel fumes and cheap fast food. People rushed past, their faces etched with the weariness of travel or the anxiety of arrival. It was the perfect place to be anonymous. Jake, in his nondescript jeans and jacket, blended in seamlessly. Yet, he felt hyper-visible, as if the locker key in his pocket was glowing red-hot. He moved with a practiced casualness, his eyes scanning, assessing, never lingering too long on any one face. He was looking for the watchers, for the men like Gavin who didn't belong, who observed without participating. He saw none. He bought a coffee he didn't want, using the time to survey the station's layout, The lockers were in a long, brightly lit corridor. He walked the corridor once, his heart hammering a steady, controlled rhythm against his ribs. He passed locker 2A18 without a glance. He reached the end, turned, and walked back, this time stopping. He pulled the key from his pocket, his movements economical and swift. The key slid into the lock. The metallic click sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence of his mind. He turned the key, pulled the small door open, and reached inside. His fingers closed around a single, thick manila envelope. It was heavy, dense with paper and something harder within. He didn't look at it. He pulled it out, tucked it inside his jacket, closed the locker door, and walked away without looking back. He dumped the coffee cup in a trash can and exited the station into the cool city air, melting back into the flow of the street. He had the package. He couldn't go back to Eleanor's. Not yet. If he had been followed, he would lead them right to her, right to Lily. He needed a secure, anonymous place to examine the contents. He found what he was looking for a few blocks away, a cheap, rundown motel that rented rooms by the hour. He paid in cash, giving a false name. The room was small and smelled of stale smoke and disinfectant. He locked the door, bolted the chain, and drew the thin, grimy curtains. Only then did he pull the envelope from his jacket and place it on the scarred table. His hands were steady as he tore open the metal clasp. Inside, just as the journal had promised, was Elena's legacy of proof. There was a stack of printed documents, the illegal shipping manifests, marked up with her own neat, damning notes in the margins. There was a small plastic bag containing a GPS tracking device, the very one that had belonged to the murdered Dr. Finch. And at the bottom of the envelope was a single USB flash drive. He pulled out his laptop, a rugged, durable model he'd had for years, and inserted the drive. He clicked open the files. It was all there. Spreadsheets that detailed a multi-million-dollar smuggling operation with cold, financial precision. Scanned images of forged phytosanitary certificates used to move the illegal plants across borders. And then he found the folder labeled Finch. He opened it. There was a recovered copy of the desperate email Dr. Finch had written to the Fish and Wildlife Service. A plea for help that had never been sent. And then the final, irrefutable piece of evidence. A map? The software loaded, displaying a topographical map of the region. 2 points were marked with bright red pins. One was labeled Official Recovery Site, matching the public record of where Finch's body was supposedly found after his accidental fall. The other pin, miles away in a remote, inaccessible canyon on Thorne's vast property, was labeled Primary Event Location. The GPS data was a digital witness, screaming the truth. Finch hadn't fallen. He'd been taken. Jake stared at the screen, at the 2 red dots that represented the beginning and end of Thorne's brutal cover-up. This was it. The smoking gun. He had the story in the journal, and now he had the cold, hard data to back it up. He possessed the evidence to not only expose a smuggling ring, but to prove a murder. The weight of the small USB drive felt immense. It was a bomb, capable of obliterating Marcus Thorne's empire of lies. The mission was no longer about finding the truth. The mission was now about surviving long enough to use it. The drive back from Asheville was a high-wire act of controlled paranoia. Jake took a different, longer route, doubling back twice to ensure he wasn't being followed. The USB drive was in his pocket, a small, dense weight of potential justice. He had copied its contents to a secure cloud server, a soldier's habit of always having a backup, a dead man's switch. But he knew the physical evidence was what mattered. It was his only bargaining chip in a game he was still trying to understand. He arrived back at Eleanor's house well after dark, slipping through the quiet residential streets like a shadow. The sight of the house, warm and lit from within, brought a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled his knees. He entered quietly and found Eleanor reading in an armchair, a shotgun resting against the wall beside her. She was no one's victim. She's asleep, Eleanor whispered, nodding toward the guest room. She asked for you. The words were a quiet gut punch. Jake looked in on Lily, who was curled under a handmade quilt, her breathing soft and even. He felt a fierce, protective ache in his chest. For her, he would burn the world down. In the kitchen, over cups of tea they barely touched. He showed Eleanor what he'd found. He opened his laptop and played the GPS data. The 2 red pins on the map, telling a story of murder more eloquently than any words. Eleanor stared at the screen, her face a mask of cold fury. We have him. She breathed, Jake! We have him. We have the proof, he corrected her grimly. Getting it to the right people without Thorne finding out is the next problem. We can't trust Brody. It has to be the State Bureau of Investigation, or the FBI. He was about to suggest a plan. A way to make an anonymous tip that would force a federal response. When the shrill ring of the telephone cut through the night, it wasn't his cell phone. It was Eleanor's landline. They both froze. No one ever called this late. Eleanor looked at Jake, her eyes wide with fear, and reached for the receiver with a trembling hand. Hello, she said. She listened for a moment, and all the color drained from her face. Her body went slack with shock, and she held the phone out to Jake. Her mouth opening, but no sound coming out. Jake took the phone. Who is this? He demanded. The voice on the other end was as smooth and cold as polished marble. Mr. Callahan, I must admit, I'm impressed. Your resourcefulness is commendable. It was Marcus Thorne. Jake's blood ran cold. What do you want, Thorne? What I want, Thorne said, a hint of amusement in his tone, is to correct a few oversights. The librarian, for instance. A loose end I should have tied up months ago. You see, while you were on your little errand in the city, my associate paid her a visit. He is very persuasive. A knot of pure dread tightened in Jake's stomach. He looked at Eleanor, who was shaking her head in denial, her hand covering her mouth. This wasn't happening, but we didn't want to be rude and interrupt her reading. Thorne continued conversationally. So we let ourselves in the back. Your security protocols are sloppy. Mr. Callahan, you should never leave a window unlocked. Jake's world tilted. He lunged for the guest room, his heart exploding in his chest. He threw the door open. The bed was empty. The quilt was thrown aside. The window above the bed was wide open. The screen neatly cut. He stumbled back into the kitchen, the phone still pressed to his ear, a strangled sound of pure rage escaping his lips. I believe you have something of mine. Thorne's voice slid like poison into his ear. The journal, and a USB drive. Trivial things, really, but sentimental. And now, I find I have something you seem to have grown quite attached to. The thinly veiled threat was gone, replaced by the stark, brutal reality. He had Lily. Let her go! Jake snarled, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Of course, Thorne said smoothly. It's a simple transaction. You will bring the journal and the flash drive to my conservatory. You will come alone. You have 1 hour, if you are late. If you attempt to bring anyone with you, or if I get so much as a whiff of Sheriff Brody or his incompetent brethren, I can assure you that little Lily will have a tragic accident. A fall, perhaps. These mountains can be so treacherous for a child. The line went dead. Jake stood in the silent kitchen, the dial tone buzzing in his ear like a swarm of angry hornets. He had been played. So completely. So masterfully. The slashed tires hadn't been a simple warning. They were a calculated move to force his hand, to make him seek out an ally. Thorne hadn't followed him. He had been waiting for him to reveal his confederate. All his training, all his caution, had led to this. He had led the wolves right to the lamb. He looked at Eleanor, who was now openly sobbing. her body racked with guilt and terror. The triumphant feeling of holding the evidence had turned to ash in his mouth. It was no longer a weapon. It was a ransom, and the price was a little girl's life for a long, paralyzing moment. The only sound in Eleanor's kitchen was the frantic thumping of Jake's own heart. The world had shrunk to a single. Horrifying Point Lily was gone. Taken. Every strategic move he had made, every precaution he had taken, had been a step in a dance choreographed by Marcus Thorne. He had failed. The self-blame was a physical acid in his throat, burning away everything but a raw, hollowed-out fury. Eleanor let out a choked sob, her hands flying to her mouth. My God. Jake, it's my fault. I left the window unlocked. No. Jake's voice cut through the air, sharp and hard as flint. He turned to face her, and the man she saw was not the weary, haunted veteran she had come to know. The grief and exhaustion were gone from his eyes, replaced by a glacial, terrifying focus. The soldier had taken command. The ranger was back. This is not your fault, Eleanor, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. This is his... And he just made his last mistake. Despair was a luxury. Self-pity was a liability. He had a new mission objective: hostage rescue. His mind, once a chaotic landscape of painful memories, was now a cool, clear tactical map. He assessed his resources, his enemy's position, the time frame. 1 hour? He wants the evidence, Jake stated. Thinking aloud, he thinks he can trade a life for his freedom. We're not making that trade. But what can we do? Eleanor cried, her voice trembling. We can't call the police. Brody will just warn him. Yes, we can, Jake said, his decision already made. He pulled out his cell phone. And yes, I'm calling Brody. Right now. Jake, no, you can't trust him. I'm not asking for his trust, Jake said. His gaze locked on hers. I'm going to give him a choice. Thorne crossed a line tonight. Kidnapping a child. That's not something a small-town sheriff can ignore. No matter how much money Thorne throws at him, Brody can either be the man who let a little girl die, or he can be the sheriff who took down a murderer. I'm betting on his survival instinct. He found the number and dialed. It rang 4 times before a groggy, irritated voice answered. Brody, it's Callahan, Jake said, his voice flat and cold. Get dressed. You're going to want to be awake for this. What the hell are you talking about? It's the middle of the night. Marcus Thorne has Lily. He kidnapped her from Eleanor Vance's home less than 30 minutes ago. He's holding her at the conservatory on his estate. He plans on killing her as soon as he has what he wants from me. There was a stunned silence on the other end. That's a crazy accusation. Callahan, shut up and listen, Jake snapped, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. A year ago, a researcher named Alistair Finch had a hiking accident. It wasn't an accident. Thorne and his man Gavin murdered him because he discovered Thorne's multi-million-dollar smuggling operation. I have the GPS data from Finch's tracker that proves they took him to a remote part of Thorne's property and killed him. I have financial records. I have a journal from Lily's mother, Elena, detailing the entire thing right before Thorne had her disappeared. 2. Thorne knows I have it all. That's why he took the girl. He let the avalanche of information settle. He could hear Brody's breathing, quick and shallow. This is way above a flat tire now. Sheriff. Jake continued, pressing his advantage. This is kidnapping and capital murder in your county. The FBI will be crawling all over this place by morning. One way or another. You have one chance to be on the right side of this. So you need to ask yourself, are you a lawman or are you Thorne's janitor? The silence stretched, thick with tension. Finally, Brody's voice came back, all the weariness and irritation gone, replaced by a grim professionalism. What's the demand? Me, alone, with the evidence, in less than an hour. It's a trap, Brody stated. He'll kill you both. I know, Jake said. That's why you're not going to let it happen. He began to lay out the plan, his words crisp and authoritative. I'm going in, just like he asked. I'm the Trojan horse. I'll give him a dummy drive. My job is to locate Lily and create a window. Your job is to have a tactical team ready. I want 2 deputies at the front gate, 2 at the service entrance. You and 1 other man come with me. You'll hold back in the woods, out of sight of the conservatory. You do not, I repeat, do not move in until you get my signal. Understood. What's the signal? Brody asked. You'll know it when you hear it. Jake said. He disconnected the call. The transformation was complete. He moved through Eleanor's house with a deadly economy of motion. He stripped off his civilian clothes and pulled on a dark shirt and cargo pants. He checked the action on his handgun, slid a spare magazine into his pocket, and grabbed a small, powerful flashlight. He was no longer a man seeking peace. He was the embodiment of the war he had tried so hard to escape. He turned to Eleanor, his face an unreadable mask. Stay here. Lock the doors. Don't answer them for anyone but me or the sheriff. He walked to the door and paused, his hand on the knob, looking back one last time. The ghosts of his past were no longer chasing him. They were marching alongside him. He stepped out into the cold. Dark night. The loyal soldier heading willingly into the kill zone. The ranger was back. The night was a moonless, ink-black canvas as Jake moved through the woods bordering the Thorne estate. He moved with a supernatural silence. A ghost in the trees, his body and mind honed to a single, lethal point beside him, matching his every step, was Rex. The dog was a coiled spring of potential energy, his senses tasting the air, every muscle taut. Jake had given him the silent command for a wide flanking maneuver, and Rex had peeled off into the darkness. A loyal shadow sent to circle the battlefield, 100 yards back. Sheriff Brody and 2 deputies were crouched, their faces grim in the dim light of their equipment. Brody had been shocked into action, his earlier indifference burned away by the stark reality of a child's life on the line. He had met Jake's cold professionalism with a grudging respect. For tonight, they were on the same side. Jake emerged from the tree line, walking calmly across the manicured lawn toward the conservatory. It was lit from within, a massive glass jewel box glowing with an eerie, humid light against the dark mountains. The air was still and heavy. As promised, the main door was unlocked. Jake took one last, deep breath and stepped inside. The heat and humidity hit him like a physical wall. The air was thick with the cloying, sweet scent of 1,000 exotic flowers. It was a beautiful, suffocating place. Marcus Thorne stood in the center of the main atrium, next to a fountain trickling over moss-covered rocks. He was impeccably dressed, holding a crystal glass of amber liquid, the picture of calm, aristocratic control. Standing a few feet away was Gavin, his arms crossed over his massive chest, his face a mask of smug brutality. Right on time. Mr. Callahan, Thorne said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast space. I do appreciate punctuality. Now, if you please, the items we discussed, not until I see her, Jake said, his voice flat, proof of life. Thorne smiled, a chilling expression devoid of any warmth, but of course, a professional to the end. He gave a slight nod to Gavin. The big man walked over to a steel door at the back of the atrium and unlocked it. He pulled it open and shoved Lily out into the light. She stumbled, her face pale and streaked with tears. But when she saw Jake, her small chin lifted in defiance, her eyes wide with terror, locked onto his, pleading and trusting. Now, Thorne said, his voice hardening. The drive and the journal. Jake held up the items. He started walking forward slowly. Let her walk to me. When she's halfway, I'll put these on the ground. Thorne considered it, then nodded. Very well. Lily started walking toward Jake, her small steps hesitant. Jake moved to meet her as they neared the halfway point. Jake feigned a clumsy stumble, letting the journal slip from his grasp. It fell to the tiled floor with a loud slap. It was the moment he needed. As Gavin's eyes flickered down to the fallen journal, Jake let out a sharp, piercing whistle, a sound that cut through the humid air like a blade. The response was instantaneous. A large pane of glass on the side of the conservatory exploded inward in a shower of glittering shards. Rex, a blur of black and sable fury, launched himself through the opening. He wasn't barking, he was a silent, four-legged missile, and his target was the one his instincts had marked from the beginning. He hit Gavin square in the chest, all 75 pounds of muscle and teeth, knocking the larger man off his feet with a sickening crunch in the split second of chaos. Jake lunged forward, not at Thorn, but at Lily. He swept her up and behind him, shielding her with his own body. "Go!" he yelled, pushing her toward the door he'd entered. Thorn's composure finally shattered. His face contorted into a mask of rage. He saw his control, his entire world, slipping away. "You fool!" he shrieked, and grabbed a heavy, ornate watering can from a nearby display. He ignored Jake and lunged toward Lily, his last and only piece of leverage, but before he could reach her, another door, a small, hidden, soundproofed door in the back wall that Jake had noted during his surveillance, was thrown open from the inside. A figure stumbled out into the light. It was a woman, rail-thin and deathly pale, her hair shorn short, but her eyes burned with the fire of a cornered tigress. It was Elena. She had heard the whistle, the crash, the shouting, held captive for months in that hidden room. She had used the last ounce of her strength to break the lock on her prison. She saw Thorn lunging for her daughter, and a lifetime of love and a mother's rage erupted in a single primal scream. "Get away from my daughter." She threw herself at Thorn, a wraith of unexpected fury, clawing and fighting with a strength born of desperation. Thorn, completely stunned by the appearance of the woman he thought he had broken and buried, stumbled backward. The spell was broken. The sound of crashing glass from Rex's entrance had been the signal. Sheriff Brody and his deputies stormed into the conservatory, shotguns raised, NCSD drop it. Thorn hands in the air. The fight went out of Marcus Thorn all at once, surrounded by lawmen, with his enforcer pinned to the ground by a snarling dog, and his ghost returned to haunt him. His empire of lies crumbled into dust. He dropped the watering can and slowly raised his hands. But the climax of the night was not his surrender. It was the moment of impossible grace that followed. Amid the chaos of shouting men and flashing lights, Lily saw the pale woman with the burning eyes. A look of dawning, disbelieving recognition washed over her face. "Mommy," she whispered. Elena turned, her face crumpling. "Oh, my baby," she sobbed. They ran to each other, colliding in the center of the atrium. Lily's small arms wrapped around her mother's neck, and Elena held her, rocking back and forth, her body shaking with tears of reunion and release. The sound of their cries was the only thing that mattered in the entire world. Jake stood back, his heart aching with a feeling he couldn't identify. He watched the mother and daughter, a fractured family made whole again, beside him. Rex sat, panting slightly, his duty done. The mission was over. The broken hearts had found their way back to each other. The months that followed were a slow, steady dawn after a long and terrifying night. The story of Marcus Thorn's downfall became a local legend, whispered about in the Havenwood Diner and reported with grim satisfaction on the Asheville News. Faced with Elena's testimony and the irrefutable evidence from the USB drive, Thorn's empire of deceit imploded. He and Gavin were facing a raft of federal charges that would ensure they would never see the outside of a prison cell again. The gilded cage had become a real one. Justice, slow and methodical, was being served for Elena and Lily. Life began again, with the help of a victims' compensation fund and Eleanor's unwavering support. They found a small house with a big garden on the edge of town. The seasons turned from the stark, cold clarity of late autumn to the soft, hopeful green of spring. The garden became their sanctuary, a place where they could put their hands in the earth and cultivate new life. The silence that had once defined Lily was replaced by questions, by laughter, and by the off-key song she sang as she helped her mother plant rows of vegetables and flowers. Jake did not disappear from their lives. The solitude he had once craved now felt empty. He found himself driving Eleanor's old station wagon, which he had repaired and now borrowed so often it was practically his to their little house several times a week. He wasn't a suitor or savior anymore. He was something simpler and more profound. He was family. He was the one who fixed the leaky faucet, who taught Lily how to properly throw a baseball, who sat on the porch with Elena in comfortable silence as they watched the sunset. He was Uncle Jake, and in becoming their protector, he had inadvertently healed himself. The ghosts of Afghanistan had grown quiet, their tormented whispers replaced by the sound of a little girl's laughter. The hypervigilance that had plagued him now served a different purpose: to watch over a child as she played, to ensure her world remained safe. He had come to the mountains seeking peace in isolation, but he had found it in connection. One bright, warm day in late May, the four of them, with Rex trotting happily alongside, hiked up a familiar path into the mountains. They stopped at the clearing where the old ruin stood. The cabin had been condemned and taken down by the Park Service, leaving only a stone foundation, which was already being reclaimed by moss and wildflowers. It was no longer a place of fear, but a scar that was beginning to heal. Elena led them a little further, to a secluded, sun-dappled meadow she had known since she was a girl. And there they were, dozens of them, pushing up through the rich soil, their delicate pink and white petals unfurling in the spring air. A field of wild ghost orchids. They were no longer a symbol of greed or a catalyst for murder. They were just flowers, breathtakingly beautiful and fiercely resilient. Lily, her face bright with joy, ran among them, pointing but never touching, just as her mother had taught her. Look, Mommy, look. Jake. The fairy's slippers are dancing. Jake stood beside Elena, watching the little girl who he had first seen as a silent, terrified ghost in a dark ruin. Now, she was all light and motion. Elena reached out and squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with a gratitude that needed no words. Eleanor smiled, her face a happy roadmap of wrinkles, leaning down. Jake scratched Rex behind the ears, the dog leaning into him with a contented sigh. He looked at this small, unlikely family that had formed from the ashes of tragedy: the brilliant botanist, the brave little girl, the wise librarian, the loyal dog, and the broken soldier who wasn't so broken anymore. The sun was warm on his face. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. And for the first time since he could remember, Jake Callahan felt completely at peace. He was home,